Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we've just opened up the meeting, so we're going to give it about another minute for folks to shuffle in and get admitted before we get started. Okay, it looks like our list of attendees is slowing in the growth, so I think we can go ahead and get started here. So good afternoon, all. My name is Valerie Cook. I am CDFW's Beaver Restoration Program Manager. So just want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today and welcome you to CDFW's Beaver Restoration Project Proposal Workshop. So as I suspect most of you know, the department's new Beaver Restoration Program was created in early 2023 with the goal of implementing beaver restoration projects to support ecosystem conservation, habitat restoration, species conservation, and improve climate change, drought, and wildfire resilience throughout California. So over the last year and a half, we have undertaken 2 pilot projects through which we have developed and refined our program's protocols and procedures. And last year, we created the project proposal form. This year, we're now ready to expand project implementation while we work toward producing the state's beaver management and restoration plan. So this webinar specifically is intended to highlight the existence of that project proposal form and where to find it, help landowners understand the process for developing and submitting proposals, and daylight CDFW's process for evaluating those proposed projects. So ultimately, this is us soliciting the submission of additional project proposals so that we can identify potential project partners throughout the state, make strategic decisions about where beavers can do the most good the soonest, and so we can start to increase the pace and scale of beaver restoration in California. So it looks like we've got about 79 attendees right now, and we're so glad to have all of you with us today. We're really excited about this opportunity to start identifying potential project partners and really looking forward to working with all of you on beaver restoration over the years to come. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our Beaver Restoration Program team, starting with Molly Alves, who is our Beaver Restoration Program Supervisor. Over to you, Molly.
Thank you, Valerie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start by introducing the rest of our team that we have on the call. First is Kyle Pagel, who's our Beaver Restoration Project Coordinator. You'll be hearing from him shortly, as well as Tanner Harris and Lee Margadon, our environmental scientists, who will be monitoring our chat for us today. Some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our webpage after its completion. Participants will remain muted, so please, excuse me, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We're not going to be monitoring the chat, so please make sure to get your questions in there so we can respond to them at the end of the call. If you are joining us on a cell phone, you won't be able to post questions, so please reach out to us. We have a Beaver Restoration Program email address that you can find on our webpage. So if you want to send questions over to us, we can respond to them after the call. Any links or forms that we reference in our slides today, we will be dropping links to those in the chat for easy access, but everything that we reference is also available on our Beaver program webpage. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to receive all of the participants and their email addresses, as well as the Q&A transcript. So any questions that we don't have a chance to get to today, we can respond to those via email. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to see so many people interested in learning more about our project proposal. We really wanted to have this webinar to provide some more context and instruction for folks who are interested in submitting a project proposal with our Beaver Restoration Program, so that you all have the information you need to do so successfully. We also additionally wanted to help everyone to better understand what exactly we're looking for in terms of the habitat characteristics that can realistically support beaver translocation on both a spatial and temporal scale. So we're going to go over the proposal and what information is required, how to submit that proposal. We'll explain our post-submission process for proposal selection and what's required for project implementation. And so for those who are joining us who aren't super familiar with our program, the Beaver Restoration Program was created primarily to gather a better understanding of where, when, and how beavers can be utilized to restore ecosystem processes and habitats in California. But at its core, this is really an ecosystem restoration program that's designed to strategically translocate beavers to areas within their historic range in California, where they can provide the maximum benefit to ecosystem health and resilience in the face of climate change impacts like severe drought and wildfire risk. So given that, we have identified three categories of projects that we are currently or in the future will be implementing. The first are our internal projects that will be occurring on CDFW owned lands. And these are identified through internal coordination with other programs such as the lands and fisheries programs, as well as our regions. And these are meant to carry out, or excuse me, really meant to achieve mutually beneficial goals in ecosystem and species restoration. And land managers and staff within CDFW, if any of you are on the call today, you can also submit proposals through this process. The second type of project are external projects, and these are identified via the proposal submission process that we'll be going over today. And those are submitted primarily by landowners who wish to have beavers translocated to their properties for the purposes of achieving their own restoration objectives. And then the third is a watershed scale or multi-landowner collaborations. And these projects are either proposals submitted by multiple neighboring property owners that wish to have beavers restored across their property boundaries, or where CDFW has identified priority watersheds, which we'll explain in a little bit. In these cases, we'll solicit those collaborations to achieve cross-jurisdictional watershed restoration via our beaver translocation efforts. And so now I'm gonna kick it over to Kyle Pagel, our Beaver Restoration Project coordinator, and he's going to go through the actual proposal form. Kyle.
All right, thank you, Molly. Okay, so covering the project proposal form, the Beaver Translocation Project Proposal form is going to be found on our Beaver Restoration Program's webpage, and you'll find the specific form under the Beaver Translocation Projects tab. It's going to be kind of 2/3 of the way down the webpage for you. One important thing to note, proposals must be submitted by the landowner or a land manager that's submitting on behalf of the landowner. Otherwise, proposals will be removed from consideration. So looking at our project proposal form, why do we have a project proposal form? They're needed to gather information regarding the suitability of the habitat for beavers and to determine if there's any potential for human beaver conflict on or surrounding the property that's being submitted. So the first page of this proposal is just asking for preliminary details regarding the property and the land use. One additional note, proposals that include multiple landowners or even additional parcels, we only have about 10 slots here for parcels, or even additional interested parties such as local tribes, resource conservation districts, NGOs, or similar groups. You should also use the additional project information spreadsheet in addition to the proposal form here, and that'll be found directly in a link right below the proposal form. Okay, so required information. So the proposal gathers important information, like I said, but we're looking at different types of information. The first part, project objectives. We want to know, as our program, what is the landowner who's submitting this project proposal? What are they looking to accomplish with beaver restoration in the context of their property? That's really important just so we're aware of your goals and we can ensure that the project has the best chance for success. We're also looking at access constraints. These inform our program about how or when access could occur to the site, both in the context of site surveys for assessments and, if selected, for translocations. The other thing we're looking at is habitat characteristics. We're looking at factors that influence whether beavers can inhabit the site and establish on the site. Important factors include water availability. So beavers need water throughout the year, but on the flip side, we also can't have water that's in such high severity where beavers wouldn't establish. We need presence of deep pools to give beavers escape cover from predators. And then we also need presence of hardwoods or other herbaceous foods to give the site enough food to support a beaver family group. And then continuing with some more additional site characteristics, we have lodge and dam building materials, simply just asking how much woody dam building material is nearby the aquatic habitat at the location. And that's really important because if restoration is the main goal of our program, these beavers need materials to build dams. And we're also looking at the current or historic beaver use. This question gives our program context. Essentially, were beavers present in the past? Why are they no longer present on the site if they were present in the past? And then it also tells us if they are present, how does this change potential translocation objectives? And then there's a reminder to include habitat photos, which we'll cover a little later. And then we also have a section talking about the potential for conflict. So this is also another important point because we want to know if there's infrastructure on the property or infrastructure on neighboring properties nearby where there could be human beaver conflict, because at the end of the day, we're trying to translocate beavers that are coming from potential conflict areas, and we don't want to translocate beavers to another site where there could be conflict and resulting in a depredation permit request. So most of the categories throughout this form are meant to be relatively simple. So once you finish up answering most of those questions, the next step is just signing the proposal. There is an electronic option present to sign the document. You can simply, using different PDF viewers, you can simply click the box and it'll electronically sign it. One important thing to note, if you're not going to sign the document electronically, that's fine. If you want to print out the document, sign it, and then re-upload it and email that PDF to us. But if you could, please attach an electronic copy of the unsigned PDF, because that facilitates us importing all of the data off of the document. Another thing is to attach the proposal form then to an email. And the next step, which can be kind of tricky, is attaching habitat photos to the email. We do request habitat photos so we have a better idea of what the site looks like. We recommend putting those photos into either a Word document or a PDF file, simply because our IT department filters out any emails with zip files. So if you zip up all of your photos onto a zip file and attach that to an email, it's going to get quarantined, and our program email account will never receive that proposal. So if you do end up going that route and sending a zip file, please follow up with an additional email to us that does not include a zip file, simply notifying our program that you have sent in an email with a zip file, and then we can attempt to pull that out of quarantine from IT. Okay, and then following submission, once a project proposal is submitted to us, we go ahead and do a preliminary review of the proposal, simply looking for red flags or factors that might preclude translocation. And then the next step from there is to conduct a site suitability assessment. As time allows, we will conduct these for the remaining proposals, and these assessments simply focus on the suitability of the site to support a beaver family, the likelihood of beavers to remain at the site, the restoration potential and the ability of beavers to dam at the site, and then the potential for conflict. Those are all really important factors that we need to factor in when we're, taking an assessment of the site as a whole. And then another couple notes on these site suitability assessments that are important. Just because our program conducts a site assessment, it does not guarantee translocation. There's still a confirmation process following an assessment. And then some sites may require improvements before being considered suitable. We will suggest those after we conduct an assessment. And then there is a chance that active or planned disturbances on the property may affect the timeline for potential project implementation. And that's simply just making sure that we don't translocate beavers to a site that's then going to have active disturbance and may affect beavers remaining on the site. And then the last step is to prioritize assessed projects using an internal model that we have. Projects are ranked relative to their restoration value and looking at factors. We're looking at factors such as wildfire risk, water conservation, salmonid conservation and habitat restoration, and then threatened and endangered species conservation. Okay, and a couple final notes on proposal submission and post-submission process. If a site is not selected for the current year, it will remain under consideration during subsequent years. So that's really important. There's no need to resubmit a proposal if you have not heard from us or not had a survey done that year. We just keep a continuous file of all these proposals and we'll keep progressing forward with them as the year moves on. And then another important thing to note is depending on the time of year, the post-submission process may be delayed due to the program's staff capacity during the field season. We typically do our translocations from summer through fall, and our assessments we try to do seasonally dependent. We try and do them winter through spring. So if we're very busy in the summer doing translocations, there may be a chance that the site assessments may be done at a different time of the year. So with that, I will hand it back to Molly.
Thank you, Kyle. All right, so once a project has been selected through that process, the timing of the translocation itself will depend on where it falls within that prioritization model ranking, as well as the elevation and seasonal conditions at the site, which have the possibility to impact our physical access of the site or the water availability, depending on the time of year. Once the translocation has been scheduled with the landowner will be required to sign a translocation agreement. And this document grants our staff at CDFW access for multi-year post-translocation monitoring, as well as defines the landowner's commitments to considering non-lethal methods such as coexistence in lieu of applying for a depredation permit in the unlikely event that the translocated beavers cause conflict on the property. After the translocation is conducted, our staff will return to the release location at predetermined intervals and monitor beaver site fidelity and habitat use, as well as any additional monitoring that's required to determine whether or not the beavers are achieving landowner and CDFW objectives over time. So just to recap everything we've covered so far, the process begins when we receive a proposal, and after that time, the submitter will receive an email confirming successful submission. Our project staff will then import the data from those electronic forms and begin our internal review. The proposals will be reviewed for any external factors that may preclude the property from eligibility and run it through that prioritization model that Kyle just mentioned to determine the restoration potential for the property. If at this point a proposal is still in our consideration, we'll schedule and conduct a site suitability assessment on the ground with the landowner. During these assessments, we'll provide recommendations for any restoration work that may need to take place before we consider beaver translocation, such as the implementation of beaver dam analogs or BDAs to increase water holding capacity of the site, or riparian planting if food availability is not adequate. If we determine that a proposal is ready to receive beavers, the translocation window will be established, at which point we require the translocation agreement be signed by the landowner. And then once signed, our staff will identify a source population of beavers via coordinating with our regions and our conflict responders, and we'll begin trapping around 2 to 3 weeks prior to the scheduled release of those beavers. For complex or sensitive projects where more robust monitoring may be required, or there's benefit in expanding our collaborative opportunities to increase our likelihood of success in that translocation, we won't be considering those types of projects until after our beaver management and restoration plan has been finalized. And that's so we can further research these sensitivities prior to implementation. After the plan is released, we'll be soliciting project proposals from locations where beavers can help to improve places around the state, such as working rangelands, salmonid habitat. We can offer opportunities for watershed scale restoration, or where a project may provide unique research opportunities to advance the science of beaver translocation and management. As we're exploring the most strategic places to return beavers in California, we're also working to gain a better understanding of where beavers are already naturally occurring. Having this more comprehensive understanding of the current beaver population and its distribution is really going to help us make decisions about where translocation is truly needed. It's also going to help us figure out where restoration goals can be achieved through natural dispersal of these existing populations. It can also, in addition, help where these existing populations exist, how they can contribute to genetic diversity within our translocation areas, or where genetically diverse populations need to be established through multiple translocation efforts in a particular area of the state. So, shameless plug, if you have any information regarding active beaver establishments in your area, please feel free to contribute to our Beaver Observation Survey on our webpage. And I think Tanner will throw a link to that in the chat as well. Finally, just a quick update. If you've not had a chance to read our recently released status report on beaver restoration pilot projects, that as well as a video update on the translocated beavers is also on our website and can be found under our program reports. And I think we'll put a link to that as well. I highly recommend you check it out. If you end up wanting to be a beaver recipient, it can give you an idea of what we've been up to and what could happen on your property. So thank you all very much for listening today. Please don't forget to put your questions into the Q&A so that we can start addressing those now. And for those that are on Zoom, This is our Beaver Restoration Program email address for any lingering questions after the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Molly. During the presentation, our team has been gathering up the submitted questions and compiling those into one place. So I think we'll read through those and answer one by one. Starting off with, let's see, I'll take a stab at this one and then punt out to Kyle as well. So first question is there a minimum size property? And I just would like to note that we have not defined a discrete cutoff size for a property, since the type of habitat, quality of habitat, and distribution of habitat all play a role in, in the likelihood that beavers can disperse onto other properties. And, there's also the role of the potential impacts to surrounding landowners' properties and what the general perception is with support or opposition from those landowners. So we do not make a discrete cutoff size. I think it is a consideration and certainly can play a factor, but we try not to sort of prejudge based on that discrete information. Kyle or Molly, is there anything else you would add to that?
I think you answered it pretty well. The only other thing I would say is, in the event that a property maybe was on the smaller side of, habitat size, that's where potentially there could be discussions with neighboring properties. If there is, additional suitable habitat on the neighbor's property, you could try and put together one of the multi-landowner project requests.
Okay, thanks for that, Kyle. Let's see. I got another one. Kyle, I'm going to have you answer this one. Is there a requirement for year-round deep wells on the property? And I think I'm going to interpret that as deep pools of water on the property. So year-round, you want to speak to year-round water?
Yeah, ideally the property would have year-round water, in the sense of we're looking at escape cover for beavers to avoid predation. So we're looking for pools that are 2.5, 3 feet deep or more, and that's preferably throughout the year, so that beavers can swim and get away from any predators that are on land. So that's important. That's something that we cover during these site suitability assessments, and just kind of discuss what the water is like throughout the year on the property, where if, maybe you have pools that are 3 feet deep during certain parts of the year, and maybe it dries up or drops to a lower level throughout the year, but that's something that would be discussed with the landowners, how those pools adjust.
I think it's worth noting that, the goal with these translocations is establishment of beaver populations. So that is a deciding factor, as we don't want to put in the effort to translocate beavers to a location where we do not believe a population can establish and stay, or where they're likely to leave. So that year-round availability of water is one of our most important factors. Okay, next one. Let's see. Is there a public list of priority watersheds? I tell you what, we have a draft of our prioritization model ready right now, with a couple of other inclusions that need to be built in there, but I might see if we will have a list produced this summer of those top 10 priority watersheds. And I think if there's any other questions about that model or our prioritization, then feel free to submit a follow-up. There will be a list. It will come out this summer. Right now we have a draft ready, but we're still building and looking at a couple of different variations of that. Let's see. A lot of funding questions here. Does CDFW have a budget to support site improvements for external projects, for example, federal lands? So the Beaver Restoration Program is funded for implementation of these beaver translocations for the beaver restoration projects. We do not have a budget for implementation of any other site improvements. So funding for site improvements, to improve habitat suitability before beavers land on site, that would be something typically that would be secured through grant funding. Or I see we have another related question here. What financial incentives are available for landowners, and are there grants available for habitat restoration and maintenance? So on the department's Beaver Restoration webpage, Beaver webpage, we have a financial assistance section on that page, which these were plugged in here specifically for supporting non-lethal management of beaver conflicts, but there's an awful lot of overlap here with habitat restoration space as well. So a few things that I could note would be the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Previously, before the state's budget constraints, I would have pointed you to the Wetlands and Mountain Meadows Restoration Grants program available through CDFW that is currently tapped out. And then incentive programs, you would want to look through NRCS for those. I'm not familiar with any other incentive programs, but none of that comes from our program's budget. We're not funded for that, nor do we administer grants or financial assistance for those purposes. So as we get leads on additional restoration funding, we'll make those available through our funding information on the webpage. Making sure I don't miss anything here. Kate would like to know, how will we be determining where beaver historically occurred in California? That information will be coming out through the department's management plan. That is literature review, that's review of all best available science. We know, and a lot of work has been done in the state so far, so we're working through just gathering best available science and information and tribal resources, gathering up all the information that we can to try to compile the clearest picture of what the beaver distribution looked like in California pre fur trade impact. Let's see. Matt is working with the Nature Conservancy on a conservation easement on a cattle ranch. Do we work with them? Molly, do you want to speak to what we're up to with the Nature Conservancy?
Yeah, we have started initial conversations with the Nature Conservancy, and once our prioritization model is ready, we're going to have a better idea of the properties that they own or manage or have conservation easements with, to identify the best parcels around the state where beavers could support existing work that they're already involved in on their own land. So yes, those are early conversations, but already in the back of our mind.
Okay, thank you. For special considerations, would we clarify if the Beaver Management and Restoration Plan is a project-specific plan or a plan that CDFW is currently working on? So that is not a project-specific plan. That is a plan that our program is working on. That is really how we approach beaver management and restoration for the state of California. And that really is a synthesis of the science that helps us make most informed decisions, helps justify the decisions that we're making, helps identify any constraints and why they are constraints, or what special considerations need to be made when implementing or considering implementation of projects. And then also helps identify and explain the department's priorities for, like, for example, the prioritization model and what goes into that. And how that sort of steers the department's beaver restoration priorities, and really helps identify within the department's lands, where we should be pursuing implementation for our own benefit as well. Next question here. Are there any current restoration objectives focused on sediment, carbon, or pollutant storage in beaver ponds? And two, how do researchers best stay in touch with CDFW to know when new projects are being implemented and planned? Let's see. I'll just go ahead and note that I'll actually ask Kyle if he's available to come back on right now. You want to speak to whether or not any of the current proposed projects have sediment, carbon sequestration, or pollutant storage identified as goals?
Right now, none of the proposals, none of them have had that proposed as goals. So that's something that certainly is interesting to look at, but no, currently nothing has come in regarding that.
Okay. And then how do researchers best stay in touch with CDFW? This is a little bit tricky, the second part of your question. We don't come out and advertise for project proposals that we have received. So I think in terms of collaborating with researchers, I'm going to suggest you contact us via email. And if you have some specific research ideas in mind, that's something we could potentially take. We could take directly to the landowner to gauge their interest and see if they were willing to be connected with a researcher and engage in a research project. So we can sort of be an intermediary, but can't really advertise who to talk to just yet. Okay, let's see. Molly says diversifying genetics is a goal. However, aren't beaver genetics watershed specific, or is that an undesired artifact of isolated populations? So I think I would clarify our note about managing genetics is if we are implementing beaver translocations, typically we're primarily translocating beavers to watersheds in areas where beavers are not present. So that means there is a genetic management component of this effort to help ensure genetic diversity. So we have to be considering whether or not we need to bring in several different family groups to try to provide genetic diversity on the landscape for establishment of a population versus if there are other existing populations of beavers within the watershed. So there are other sources of genetics in the area where through dispersal they can accomplish gene flow without our involvement. In terms of genetic diversity, that's the aspect that we're interested in. Is the beaver translocation agreement tied to the deed? What happens when property ownership of a release site changes? So no, not tied to a deed at all. That is just an agreement between the department and a specific landowner that just defines what access they are granting to us and for what purposes and what they are agreeing to on their end. So it's sort of a longer term entry permit for us for monitoring and an agreement on their end of what commitments they are making to help support successful implementation of the project. So not tied to a deed, and if property ownership changes, then that agreement was with the existing landowner at the time and does not carry over. Is this only after a depredation permit is submitted? Can you submit a plan to relocate nuisance animals without filing for depredation? So I need to be very clear here that this form is specifically for the implementation of a beaver restoration project. This is for receipt of beavers. There is no mechanism for you to request that beavers on your property are relocated. If you're having a conflict on your property, that's something where you need to submit a wildlife incident report report the beaver depredation and conflict to the department so that the respective staff who actually deal with human wildlife conflict can make contact with you and evaluate those issues. So this document, there's no process for asking for relocation of nuisance animals. We work through a process with our conflict staff to look for opportunities to use conflict beavers in lieu of depredation permit issuance, to utilize those conflict beavers in these restoration projects. What are the possibilities for properties that are adjacent to national parks with intact range leases? Kyle, you wanna touch on this one? What are the possibilities for properties? I'm assuming this means project implementation on properties that are adjacent to national parks with intact range leases.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if this is saying that this person owns a property that is rangeland that's next to a national park, or that they own a property next to a national park that has range leases. But we typically look at, during our site suitability assessments, we look at cattle grazing impacts within the riparian corridor, and that's factored in. I would say in regards to anything to do with national parks, we're currently working through partnering with federal agencies on various projects. So my suggestion would be, always when in doubt, feel free to submit a project proposal to us, and that way we can know the ins and outs of your property and figure out what hurdles we need to overcome to figure it out.
Yeah, I think case by case basis, always unique and unique partners to work with. So, okay, next up, for high elevation sites that are snowed in during the winter and spring, could site visits occur in the summer or fall? Kyle, we'll tag you in on that.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, we only have a certain amount of bandwidth during our translocation season for our staff, but we do definitely try to, if it's convenient and we're passing through the area doing another translocation, or if time allows, we definitely can work around making sure that we get a site survey in somewhere when it's not snowed in. So that's definitely possible.
Okay. And let's see. Are there requirements regarding how far away the new site is from the site they're being translocated from, or from other sites known to be home to beavers? Molly, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sorry, just trying to find that so I can read it. Yeah, so we have two temporary holding facilities currently that we're using. So when we're trapping the beavers for translocation, we're temporarily quarantining them until we have the opportunity to capture the entire family group, or at the very least a mated pair from the conflict site. And so we have our first location in Rancho Cordova, and our second is down in Los Banos at our Judas Nutria holding pens. And so we're trying to source beavers from within an hour or two from those locations, just so, one, for trapping logistics, but two, we don't want to expose these animals to any extreme stress through long road trips. So yeah, I would say in terms of the source beavers, it depends on how close they are to our holding facilities. And then given that these are only two facilities that we have access to right now, we don't necessarily have a mileage limit from how far beavers can go. It really depends on where are the best and most strategic places that beavers can go from the source location and our holding facilities.
Okay, and then you want to touch on, is there a distance threshold or requirement from other sites that are known to be home to beavers?
Yeah, so we are, kind of rule of thumb is we're not going to place beavers any less than really a stream mile from an existing beaver population. Beavers can be incredibly territorial, and so we don't want to be placing beavers in an area where there's going to be conflict with existing beavers. Again, like Valerie said, we really want to put them in places where there's all of the incentives for them to stay put and build dams and help us achieve these restoration goals that we have. And so that's why looking at current and historic beaver presence at the sites is a big part of our assessment.
Okay, thank you. And then I think I would add a note on there about requirements regarding how far away the new site is from the site they're being translocated from. I think, one important thing to keep in mind here is that the current distribution of beavers in the state of California has been incredibly impacted by human activities over the last couple of centuries. So, in some locations, we are very much constrained by proximity to other source populations. There are some places that we just don't have, nearby options to begin with. I mean, conceptually, nearer is better, but the reality is we are not always going to have that luxury, and we're also constrained by the locations of our housing facilities where we can implement our quarantine procedures. So I would note that, to manage that, we really focus on comparisons of source locations to recipient locations, because really the concern there with distance is what else could you be translocating, right? Thinking about disease, invasives, other pathogens in the system. So it's a lot of comparison of the conditions that those beavers are coming from and where they're going to, and then making sure that we have adequate quarantine procedures in place that prevent us from introducing, any other diseases or pathogens or invasives at the recipient watershed. Just because we know we cannot always have that nice and nearby. And we also recognize that sometimes nice and nearby also can be the source of a problem. So, okay, let's see. Next question here. My ranch includes a sizable national forest grazing lease. Do you work with Sequoia National Forest biologists and rangers on range management and water table improvement? Let's see, Kyle or Tanner, can one of you speak to the discussions that we've been having with folks down in that area?
Yeah, we recently just met with some folks from the Sequoia National Forest, and we've been kind of working as a program towards working through what the process would be like to work with different national forests. So we are currently having discussions with Sequoia National Forest and some other national forests within the state. So I would definitely encourage, once again, I would encourage you to submit a project proposal, and we will, work through those, with your project in mind and other projects that are submitted that those are relevant to.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Let's see, next question here. How scalable is our translocation work, say, number of sites per year across the state? I think we can say that we are, for the most part, at this point, constrained by number of staff, proximity of staff, and realistically proximity of facilities. The locations of our housing facilities are going to be one of our, I'll say, more geographic constraints, which just, creates added workload. Within the department, we do have sort of some scaling calculations in our what's called the state's service-based budgeting exercises. I don't have numbers off the cuff of how many staff equate to how many projects across the year. There are a lot of factors that come into play there. I will note that this is going to be the first season where we are trying to reach beyond implementation of the pilot projects. So I think this year is going to we're going to be learning a lot about how much we can accomplish with a set number of hands, and figuring out sort of what goes well and what doesn't, and how to work most efficiently to get more projects done. So I think all that to say, this year is going to be a lot of lessons learned about how many sites per year we can get done across the state, at current staffing levels, and what opportunities we have to get more done. Let's see, question here. How far away from proposed introduction sites would we consider for human beaver conflict potential? Do we have a model or tool to consult for dispersal distance and time? I think I would say, home range size and dispersal distances and over time, there are an awful lot of factors that come into play there in terms of, habitat suitability, food availability, water conditions, disturbance. There are a lot of different factors that are going to drive the potential for dispersal. I'm trying to interpret this question correctly. How far away from a proposed introduction site would we consider for human beaver conflict potential? I think definitely we're off the cuff ballpark. I would say within a couple of miles is what we're looking more closely at. But I think, I'm probably better off punting to Molly and Kyle to get their input.
Yeah, I just want to add, going back to our efforts to create this beaver management and restoration plan, we are leaning on other experts across the country who are either at academic institutions or other beaver management practitioners, and really trying to use the best available science. And so there are currently a couple of studies underway to look at beaver dispersal distances and timing. And so we're in active conversations with those researchers so that we really have the most current information available to us to really make these determinations moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, another one here. If a site is considered currently not suitable for releasing beavers, will CDFW provide recommendations of work to be done at the site to make it suitable? Kyle, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so that's part of what our kind of site suitability assessment is. That's why we do that, is in order to, give you feedback on the site that you submitted, and give any potential recommendations that may make the site suitable for beavers over time. So that's something, we're not going to come and assess your site and then just leave and not say anything about it. If it's not suitable, we're going to provide recommendations if it's possible to make it suitable for a translocation in the future.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Let's see here. Question about timeline for the management plan. So we are expecting to have a draft ready this summer. But I will note for the group that we do expect to have scoping meetings in advance of having a draft ready and out for review. So watch for word from us on another webinar for scoping of that management plan. Checking to see here. Okay, if there are any questions that we have not gotten to here, you can expect a follow-up through email from us. We've got everybody's information through the attendees list in case there are questions that we've not gotten to here. I see we've got a question. Is there preference for tribal lands? I will say we do not have a formal preference outlined for tribal lands, but I will say, we talk a lot, we've placed a lot of emphasis on the fact that this program was created for ecosystem restoration purposes. And the driving forces behind this program is for ecosystem restoration purposes. But I will say, we do also place priority on cultural importance of the beaver to tribes. So, quite honestly, from our perspective, it doesn't matter what ecosystem restoration objectives they do or do not have. If this is a culturally important species to a tribe, that ranks right up there for us. So we do place priority there and try to figure out, we will be trying to figure out how to most efficiently continue supporting tribal objectives and tribal priorities for reestablishing beaver on tribal lands. So hopefully that answers your question there. Okay, just looking for anything else here about the project proposal. Questions related to project proposals. Yeah, I think a lot is how many are we translocating in a year? And this is, TBD. We are a year and a half of translocations in where we were specifically focused on 2 pilot projects. And now we are looking to scale based on what we've learned and what's gone well and what didn't necessarily go well. And historical beaver range map. You can watch for that information to come out within the management plan. There is nothing published from the department at this time in terms of that reference being put out by us. Okay, just checking to see, got anything else on. See one more question here about a specific property, about contiguous miles of creek frontage with at least 1 active beaver. I think to that question, I would note how many beavers could this amount of riparian habitat support, i.e. what is the size of an individual beaver's, family's range. And I think that is very much dependent on that habitat and the amount of vegetation and the amount of water. So I think that's not something that we could answer short of doing site assessments to actually evaluate the resources that are there. Okay, with that, it looks like we've got about 1.5 minutes left on the calendar or on the appointment. So I'll just note that any questions we did not get to live, we can follow up here. Oh, sorry, I've got one more question coming through, but we're just about off here. If we have a site we'd like to have beavers at for ecosystem restoration, but we know it currently is not suitable because it needs restoration, is it appropriate for us to submit a proposal to engage with CDFW, or should we contact CDFW in a separate way? Kyle or Molly, would either of you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say, feel free to submit a proposal. That'll kind of walk you through the, questions that we're asking on that proposal form, and then include some habitat photos and any, include any information. Obviously, you are of the opinion that it needs restoration currently, so include why you think that. But that can go a long way, just including that and then including some site photos. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Molly.
Yeah, I'd just say that there's a number of other resources in the state, like the Cal PBR network that kind of specializes in helping landowners implement beaver-based restoration on their properties. So that might be a good place to start. Because if you submit a proposal and you think that we're ultimately just going to recommend that you implement some restoration prior to us placing beavers there, that's basically who we're going to send you to. So I believe that their information is on our website, but if not, we can put their website in the chat.
I think I would also note that, this also is an opportunity for us to learn who our potential partners are on the landscape. So there may be multiple other neighboring landowners in the vicinity that are also interested, or you may be in a priority watershed. So, us having that information about your interest and your potential timeline or your plans for some preliminary restoration work, I think I would encourage you to go ahead and get in contact with us and just, share with us the information you have about what you are planning and what your timeline looks like. But I think the more we can understand potentials on the landscape, the better. Okay, well, we are out of time, so I want to thank everybody for your engagement today. Really appreciate all of the questions and your attendance. Like I said earlier, we're really looking forward to connecting with all of our partners on the landscape and moving forward with implementation and advancing beaver restoration in the state. So please stay in touch. Please feel free to reach out through email if you have any additional questions. Or if you want to start engaging on potential restoration projects. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a good week.
Thank you all.